What's up guys, and welcome back to Reflections. This show basically covers anything that makes you go what the fuck, kind of blows your mind, or just generally confuses you. Today we'll be talking about one of the pillars of the internet, a show that has garnered a huge amount of recognition, Rick and Morty. And more specifically, we'll be talking about Morty, and even more specific than that, we'll be talking about the decline in the evident sanity of our favorite little Morty. The way to really understand his actual decline is to know where he started. So in episode 1 of season 1, we see Morty, just a regular kid perceiving things as a regular kid would. He's kind of slow in some areas, but really he's a pretty chill guy. Enter Rick, a drunken sociopath with a penchant for violence that is almost poetically destructive. And he also happens to be the grandfather of Morty. When we're first introduced to this duo, Morty, who actually plays what's called the straight man in film and video and TV shows and stuff like that, what this actually is defined as is not a heterosexual being, but actually a person who is essentially reacting the same way the audience member, we, you and me, regular people, would interact and react to the show. And as things go on, his interactions change. But to start with, in season 1, his reactions are very confused and distraught. And a lot of the time, he's trying to figure out what exactly Rick is trying to do. Now, in the first episode, this is really put to the punchline and demonstrated by the fact that within the first 12 minutes, he ends up having to try and defuse a neutrino bomb, which is crazy. Now imagine if the first 10 minutes of your existence, you actually had to do something that is considered traumatic for most people. Now, the reason this is important is it sets up the dynamic between Morty and Rick. If that particular Morty even survived that first event, which is something we'll get into later when we discuss the whole idea of multiverses in the Rick and Morty universe, which is in of itself kind of a parallel. That said, talking about this, we realized that this would be a huge turning point and starting point, really, for someone to go from the normal complacent life that they live into a descent in almost instant insanity. But Morty is showing a fair bit of resistance to this idea. So throughout the first season, we see that Morty is slowly getting kind of used to the almost systematic abuse of Rick. He's just sort of starting to go along with it, realize that he doesn't really have much of a choice in the matter, and should just try and get this shithole over with as soon as humanly possible. Now, when that continues to just continually derail, no end in sight, we kind of get this feeling that he doesn't feel like he has any sort of outing. And the frustration is evident, but it doesn't seem to actually go anywhere until in about season 2. In this season, Morty becomes noticeably more angry. He has his issues with Rick, even though he's had some shit explained to him by Bird Person about why Rick is the way he is. He really doesn't give a shit. He's been put through a lot at the hands of this drunken sociopath, and quite frankly, he kind of needs somewhere to vent. So season 2 sees him venting once he's broken a certain line. Now this line is actually defined by him actually accidentally murdering an old man who is crotchety and kind of a dick, just in general. So he ends up being shoved by Morty, and it inadvertently ends up killing this man. Now at that point, Morty snaps, and from that point onward, he loses any sort of semblance of sanity for that short period of time in which he starts going into a passionate sense of murder. He ends up gearing up with a crazy mech suit and slaughters the living shit out of everybody. In fact, it gets to such a point that's almost unbearable that even Rick, the detached sociopath that we know, even starts commenting and mentioning it.
My dick! Eat this! Ooh, boy, you're really going for it over there, huh?
The key difference here is that Rick is indifferent. He doesn't care. Life, death, love, people, his family, they don't matter to him. They are, as he puts it, just numbers things he can replace really easily. They're just sort of a guise for him to use. Now, this is real fucked up, but it's actually kind of specific to his ability to disenfranchise from the violence and act as a more moral individual. Though his morals are a little fucked up, he is actually able to pull himself away from the violence, whereas Morty, who is a more emotional person, who isn't understanding this idea that morals and feelings and stuff like that are essentially constructs, he's more emotionally invested, and therefore this murder, this passionate violence, is way more meaningful. This means that he is slowly degrading and starting to have the lines between good and evil kind of break down. And more importantly, it's seeing that his mental sort of line, his line in the sand, as the term is used all the time, is slowly disappearing. He doesn't have a line in the sand. He doesn't have this is too far for me to achieve what I want. This passionate rage that he's got kind of just festers and builds up as the series goes on. This is actually similar to how, as Summer was introduced almost as the secondary straight man once Morty started to really act out and start getting violent, they needed a secondary straight man, a regular normie, to ask the same questions. In season 3, she has started to act out at this point. Now, in season 2, this is where Morty was. And now he's able to actually recognize in season 3 the detrimental effects. In season 2, Morty has a massive angst and a lot of thirst for bloodshed that he developed because of Rick's cold and unfeeling nature. Now, as a more emotional and moral individual, he's developed this attitude that murder is okay, it's fine to be completely soulless and evil because they don't matter, but he doesn't really realize or grasp what none of that mattering means. It doesn't kind of resonate with him in the same way that it does with Rick, in that my ends are justified by my means. Getting to the episode that features, you guessed it, evil Morty, we actually realize that this is one of the most drastic turning points in Morty as a character. And we really get to see his descent towards a more dangerous character start. He starts to understand the cold-hearted ways that Rick operates. He actually sees the nihilistic and in some cases outwardly sociopathic ways that Rick operates, and in fact develops a distinct hatred for it. In fact, it's so palpable, in fact, that they take down a surrogate version of Rick, which is kind of indicative of what's probably likely to happen in the future. It's driven a wedge between Rick and Morty because Morty is now really seeing that there's not any actual justifiable end or reason for their actions to be so callously cold and unfeeling. There's no point to it. There's no reason. And this is really starting to build up a hatred in Morty towards his towards his grandpa Rick. Rick is really only out for his personal benefit. As he so often points out,
that's not even my original Summer.
Oh my god, he's not bluffing. He's not bluffing.
Rick, why not shoot through her?
And this kind of brings Morty to this idea that he has to kind of distrust and slowly understand how Rick operates in a more literally understanding everything that he does and what motivates him. Now, this is dangerous because it kind of starts to breed this idea of an antagonist or anti-hero attitude in Rick, which we've already all known, but Morty starts to see him as more of the enemy than the anti-hero that he is. When we get to the end of season 2, here's where things really start to go to shit. Morty's really starting to show that hatred towards Rick. It's becoming incredibly obvious, especially in the way that he started calling Rick out for his bullshit and the way that he's just cold-hearted and doesn't care about anybody else. And he's really started to guilt trip the living shit out of Rick for some of the crap that he does. Now, as Rick normally doesn't care, this doesn't really affect him up until later, when most of the people that he starts feeling for, and he even says he opens up to, he decides to be open, ends up allowing him to be cut down and close himself off and be even more cold-hearted. Now, this is a dark kind of turn, but when Rick decides to actually go and surrender himself, or at least that's what it appeared to be in the season 2 finale, yeah, well, that didn't end up quite going as well as everybody thought it would from a moral perspective. Even though Morty was essentially guilt-tripping the shit out of Rick at this point, it clearly didn't affect him as much as people were hoping. He ends up using this as an excuse to take down the government of the universe, or galaxy, or whatever you want to call it, the interdimensional government, and the second best thing, the Council of Ricks, which was basically the same thing. So finally, we're at season 3, the season everybody's been waiting for about a year and a half. So this is really the beginning of the end of Morty's arc. Now, obviously we still have Summer. She started to act out in a similar way that Morty was acting out in season 2, in the beginning of season 2, and she's slowly starting to develop a similar kind of feel, I think, or will, somewhere throughout season 3. But the focus being on Morty, we realized that at this point, Morty has a very open hatred towards Rick. The degradation of Rick and Morty's relationship is kind of at its zenith. During the escape from the Council of Ricks, Rick hands Morty a phaser or gun or whatever you want to call it, so that in case they need it for the future, which was implied to be the escape, it would be useful. However, Morty doesn't read the tag, which says, "Shoot me in case of standoff." Now, they do end up getting into a standoff where Summer would end up being the victim, and Rick incites Morty into hitting him with the laser weapon. Now, Morty ends up giving into this rage and shooting Rick in the head. Now, this horrifies Summer, kind of amuses the Council of Rick member, and kind of gratifies Morty. So he started to kind of give into that sense of bloodlust again a little bit, but this time it's not focused on any rando strangers. It's actually a huge dislike of Rick. This is where things really have gotten serious. We finally got that feel that Morty is done taking shit from Rick. Now, obviously this was a fake out in which allowed Rick, Morty, and Summer to actually get away, but this was significant. Rick seems to be under the impression that Morty won't kill him. However, it seemed pretty evident by this that this is definitely going to be the case, that he's definitely open to the idea. That said, this leads to the divorce of Beth and Jerry. Now, this is, as most people will know if they've ever gone through this, the divorce of a parent is a horrific time for children. It messes with their heads, and it messes with the parent as well, who might end up acting out towards the kids as a way to deal with some of their grief. Rick, Morty, and Summer don't take this well. However, Summer really starts acting out on the apocalyptic Earth, and Morty's arm, which is implemented by Rick, of course, goes on a murder spree, trying to deal with his rage toward his father in a way that's constructive, kind of. He gets physical violence to kind of satiate his frustration with his dad in the fact that he allowed his mom to break up with him and sever the relationship ties and everything else. When this bloodlust is finally sated after a while, this hasn't satiated the arm, which has its own personal vendetta. Now, it goes on a massive slaughter spree, which kind of makes Morty realize that murder for no reason is pretty fucked up. But at the same time, he kind of gets this attitude of accepting murder when you have little other option, which obviously has been a theme throughout the majority of Rick and Morty throughout season 1, 2, and now 3. But what makes this significant is that he might have the reasoning or feeling that he has to get rid of Rick in the future, and he might see it as a necessary way to deal with the problem. And finally, in the latest episode, it is shown that in this time previously where he's had disdain for Rick, it started to build and come to a head to a point that we haven't seen before. Obviously, that's how characters progress, but he's faced with outsmarting a drunk Rick. Now, drunk Rick had pre-recorded a ton of challenges and things for these characters that were introduced to have to deal with, along with Rick and Morty. Now, Rick at this point is sober and thinking relatively clearly in a more feeling way, which is weird, but Morty, being Morty and having dealt with Rick's shit for so long, understands the way that Rick operates when he's drunk. So he starts explaining and deconstructing every little issue and pointing out that nothing matters, nothing would have changed, and there are very clear ways to understand the way that Rick thinks and ways to outsmart his bullshit. His understanding of Rick is even underlined in a previous episode, episode 1 that was put on April 1st, was a demonstration of him knowing Rick better than the council. In fact, when he says,
Terrorist and now he's dead.
Yeah, if you think my Rick's dead, he's alive. And if you think you're safe, he's coming for you.
and also points out to Summer,
Well, he's not a villain, Summer, but he shouldn't be your hero. He's more like a demon or a super f***ed up god.
this really demonstrates Morty's disillusionment of the moral bankruptcy of Rick and his now more than ever hatred of Rick and the way that he does things. This is compounded in the 3rd episode when you get the feeling that Morty might actually get a payoff for his grandfather loving him or feeling for him emotionally, set up by a sober Rick beforehand. And as in all of Rick and Morty form, this is completely destroyed and undercut by the reality that people are fucked up and hate for no basic reason. And of course, in Rick's case, he doesn't care about anything, and it's demonstrated in this, the fact that it was actually a dedication to a totally throwaway character. When this happens, Morty, similar to how Rick essentially in the end of season 2, gets opened up and then crushed and colded up again, we get a similar development in Morty in that his faith in Rick is momentarily restored until he realizes that it didn't fucking matter. It was a similar weight thing, which was what triggered it, and as such, his disillusionment with Rick is cemented in stone, which I think will end up coming to bite Rick in the ass. Now, what I think will happen in the future is that this is going to compound in further episodes, which is demonstrating the idea of agency and whether or not Morty actually has any of his own, and we'll see whether or not he teams up with evil Morty or becomes a more intelligent, vindictive, and fucked up version of that evil Morty in the future. With that said, guys, that's my thoughts. Thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. Hopefully we'll get some interesting discussion in the comments down below. If you've got something cool to add, maybe a theory that counteracts what I think, or better yet, you've got your own theory as to what's going to happen to Morty in the future, what's going to happen to Rick, what's going to happen in general, let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Look out for more videos similar to this. Anyway, guys, my name is Splice. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Splice out.